very distinguished expert from Russia. She kindly agreed to come and speak at the Monterey Institute in May when I was in Moscow meeting with experts and looking for the best top experts to come to the Monterey Institute. And several parties independently recommended that Professor Gaman Golutvina be invited to enlighten us on Ukrainian crisis, on the situation in Ukraine, the relations of Ukraine and Russia and the United States, if you have any questions on that aspect. And so I was very happy to meet Dr. Gaman Golutvina and discuss the concept of this module that she's teaching currently at the Monterey Institute. And we agreed that today Dr. Gaman Golutvina will speak on the topic of whether Russia and Ukraine need each other. The reason we formulated the title this way, again, is because when you read the US media or English language media these days, very often you see and feel that Ukraine and Russia, not only they don't need each other, they would like to be as far away from each other as possible. So I asked Dr. Gaman Golutvina to tell us that whether that's the case or there may be other interpretations of the situation. Professor Gaman Golutvina is the chair of the Department of Comparative Politics at Gaman University, which is the premier school, most prestigious school in the Russian Federation that trains diplomats. She is an author of about 7 books, textbooks, and hundreds of articles. And I believe, from my conversations with Dr. Gaman Golutvina and from knowing how bureaucracy works in Russia, the most time-consuming and at the same time honorable hat that she wears these days is being a chairwoman of the Russian Association of Political Scientists. So, political science, may be hard to believe, is a new science in Russia. So it's very tumultuous, complex, but very important process of laying out new roles, not just in academia, but in training, in developing the new mentality of the post-Soviet Russian youth, post-Soviet Russian experts, and Dr. Gaman Golutvina is at the helm of it. So it won't be an overstatement to say that today in front of us there will be an expert who is a foremost expert on the subject. Let's work in the format of about 35 minutes presentation, 40-minute presentation, and then Q&A without the break. And I welcome Dr. Gaman. Thank you.
Thank you very much for introduction. Dear colleagues, dear friends, thank you very much for coming. And first of all, allow me to express my sincere gratitude to the organizers of this program for the invitation to take part in this program. As to the topic, in my presentation, I will follow such agenda. First of all, the factors that united Russia and Ukraine, the factor of the current crisis in the relations between Russia and Ukraine, and the perspective of the future relations between two nations, including the potential, I'm sorry for the microphone handling, is it okay? So, and the perspective of the future relations, including the potential institutional framework. What are potential pluses and minuses of the Ukrainian integration with European Union and Customs Union? So, let us think in the current Ukrainian crisis become more clear if we take into consideration the fact that proximity of Russians and Ukrainians is so high that separation of Russia and Ukraine after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 may be assessed as a process rather similar to the separation of East and West Germany. The significance of Russian-Ukrainian relations is defined by a number of factors. Among them, I find important to stress the following. First, namely the union of the three Slavic peoples, the third was Belarusian, constituted historical, economic, and spiritual core of three historical forms of the statehood since 15th century. I mean Muscovite state, the Russian Empire, and the Soviet Union. The second, both nations belong to the same ethnic, religious, and linguistic group. The third, both nations have similar models of political culture and a high degree of penetration at family ties level. Today, 20% of the population of Ukraine are Russians, and in Russia, not less than 10–15% are Ukrainian by origin and nationality. So Ukraine and Russia have not only common history, similar language and mentality, but also numerous actual family ties and human relations. The fourth, high degree of interpenetration of contemporary economic and industrial relations since Soviet time, when Ukraine was one of the most industrially developed and definitely the richest republic of the USSR. It was a real and economic and industrial colossus. This fact demonstrates that there was no infringement of Ukrainian rights and interests in the Soviet Union, and this also explains the fact that any kind of hostility between the two nations did not occur in the past. The tension between them arose only after the collapse of the USSR. First of all, as a result of intensive propaganda conducted over the last 23 years in Ukraine towards Russia, Russians, and common history. Nevertheless, it is obvious that the propaganda, even very sophisticated, would not have achieved its goal if the crisis had not internal prerequisites. What are these internal prerequisites of the current crisis in the Ukraine? First of all, I should stress very poor economic situation, despite the extremely favorable conditions for economic prosperity. Really, Ukraine possesses some competitive advantages till now. These are fine climate, fertile earth, developed transport infrastructure, ports, and even big stock of natural resources as compared to other European states. At last, it is a status of transit country providing Russian gas and goods into EU. Ukraine has developed chemical, iron and steel industry, heavy and shipping building, atomic engineering, by the way, one of the world's largest. However, contrary to favorable starting conditions, transformational crisis in Ukraine became one of the deepest at the post-Soviet space. During the 1990s, GDP reduced on 60%, much more than in Russia and Central and Eastern European countries. Since the year of 2000 and until 2008, there was slight economic growth in Ukraine that is in many respects was provided by Russian gas price reduction. Volume of privilege discount of the Russian Federation on delivering gas to Ukraine exceeded $400 billion. But even with taking into consideration this fact, by 2013, GDP of Ukraine only slightly exceeded 70% of 1990 level and 20% lower than the level of 1990 and twice lower than GDP of Belarus, which had worse condition of transition to market economy. Now even this level can be lost. In 2014, Ukrainian economy already lost 10% and continues to fall. The second precondition of the crisis. The second factors of Ukrainians' vulnerability is impressive regional differences. The economy of Ukraine is extremely diverse in the regional dimension. Regions of the country fall into four groups: capital, Kiev, industrially developed regions located in the east, coastal regions, south, and poor agricultural regions, western and partly central Ukraine. The east and the south gives about 60% of receipts in the budget, whereas the west of the country less than 20%. Meanwhile, during all the period of the independence, the government of Ukraine redistributed the budget in favor of the budget from the east and the south of the country in favor of Kiev and the western areas. In any other country, more developed and well-educated regions dominate, while in Ukraine, since 1991, the elite has given preferences to the western regions, less developed by professing nationalistic ideology. The third. Further, we should bear in mind historical preconditions of current Ukrainian crisis. Contemporary Ukrainian territory is composed of the lands that in different time were integrated to Ukraine, mostly due to the politics of Moscow. Just one example. In 1954, the leader of the Soviet Union, Nikita Khrushchev, gifted Crimea to Ukraine, neglected even formal procedures. This very short example shows that the history of Ukraine has a lot of complexity and discrepancy that made the state building rather difficult. Under the aegis of Russia, the heirs of the future Ukrainian state gathered in one non-homogeneous but single entity. Nevertheless, at the same time, the Ukrainian nationalism arose and has been cultivated. Since 19th century, it has become openly anti-Russian. The aspiration of Ukraine to find nationality and effective nation-state nowadays are complicated because of the xenophobia and shortage of tolerance typical to Ukrainian society even nowadays. The further source of the current Ukrainian crisis is extreme ineffectiveness of Ukrainian governing elites in political and economic sphere. Numerous political crises in Kiev, corruption at all the levels of power, domination of oligarchs, and an absolute indifference of the authority to the destiny of citizens and the country. Among main problems of Ukraine are oligarchization. According to Forbes data, in 2013, assets of the 100 richest Ukrainians amounted about 30% of gross domestic product. To compare, 200 of the richest Russian businessmen possess about 20% of GDP of Russia. Another problem is high corruption. Further, nationalism, and absence of systemic socio-economic policy. These problems have generated mass disappointment at the central authorities in the country with well-educated population. And the final, last not least, it is flat strategy in the field of state building based on ethnic nationalism. The model of the unitary national state selected by the Ukrainian elite in the early 90s, by the way, they understood national as ethnically homogeneous, ignores fundamental social and cultural heterogeneity of the country. It divides the country, especially in times of elections. Ukrainian elite persistently denied the existence of the problem of the second Russian state language, expelled propositions of federalization and autonomization from the political agenda, and empowered the split between the West and the East of the country in all elections. Difference among language and cultures gained political sense and became a factor of destabilization over the last decade. So, the actual collapse of the state, refusal of the elite to solve the main problems, and balancing on the verge of failed state led to the present crisis. It is known that the reason, the concrete reason or the pretext for the tension in Russian-Ukrainian relations was the intention of Ukraine to sign an agreement establishing a free trade zone with the European Union. The conflict was triggered by elitists, Ukrainian elitists, who misled people. Many citizens of Ukraine considered the agreement between Ukraine and the EU as a step to obtaining full membership in the European Union. Of course, it was wrong. EU will hardly sustain entering of Turkey and Ukraine, and it is possible only in such order, at least for one reason. A key problem of EU it is the maintenance of energy security. Therefore, EU is not ready to aggravate the problem of power security in connection with the reception of the countries that do not have power resources. Ukraine is one of these countries. The leaders in Brussels are ready to continue so-called expansion without taking any responsibility for Ukrainians. The agreement was looking very attractive to United Europe, a new market without any extra charges. As to Ukraine, the media presented the matter as follows. Ukraine intends to enter EU while Belarus, Russia, prevents their striving for prosperous European future. To what extent this is true? Maybe real way to prosperity for Ukraine in its reorientation from Russia to EU? Let us see. Let us see by the arguments and statistics. Economic calculations show that reorientation of Ukraine from Russia on EU could lead to essential economic losses in the following directions. The first, losses of Ukraine from possible reduction of export deliveries of Ukrainian goods to Russia and other customs countries since changing political and economical situation. We should bear in mind the geographical structure of Ukrainian exports. Now, in geographical structure of Ukrainian exports, customs union countries win first place among groups of the countries with weight nearby 35%. The EU countries' share constitute about 25%. However, the case not only in 10% difference, but in that Russia acted as the largest counterpart of Ukraine in export, in many times advancing the other country. In 2013, Russia absorbed about 25% of Ukrainian export, whereas Turkey, the second partner after Russia, only 6%, then China, Egypt and Poland, about 4%. On a number of the goods and commodity groups, Russian share in Ukrainian exports reaches 70–80%. For example, Russia absorbed about 80% of Ukrainian printed material export, 70% of papers, 70% of cardboards and items from them, 65% spirits, 60% vehicles, including 70% railway techniques, and about 50% motor vehicles and accessories. About 60% chocolate, 55% dairy goods, 50% items from stone and ceramics, 50% machines and equipment, 50% meat, fruit, vegetables, 40% furniture and chemical goods. Opportunities of Ukraine to reorientate in deliveries goods to other markets are very limited. Besides that, essential importance has export structure of Ukraine to Russia on the other hand and EU on the other. The detailed analysis of EU imports from Ukraine confirm essential discrepancies in commodity structure of purchases and considerable overweight of the goods with more high added value in Russian imports in comparison with EU. At the whole import of EU from Ukraine, raw positions is nearby 60%, whereas in customs unions import, this indicator constituted only 10%. In customs union import from Ukraine, in 2013, the major commodities were steel armature, jet engines, gas turbines, steel, aluminium, steel pipes, sheet hire, railway techniques, diesel locomotives, steel pipes, and so on. Meantime, the main commodity position of EU import from Ukraine were steel semi-finished products, corn, iron ore, cable goods, sunflower seed oil, oil cakes, and so on. Thus, proceeding from a devastating of trade and economic relation of EU with customs union countries, in 2013, the economic damage in case of sharp deterioration will constitute about $15 billion per year. The second direction of potential Ukrainian losses in case of reorientation from customs union from Russia to United Europe. The analysis of dynamics of investment and productive activity of Russian companies in Ukraine showed that the association with EU accompanying the fast transition to technical standards and grades of the European Union will lead to weakening of Russian companies in direct investments, and also the companies of Kazakhstan and Belarus, in sectors of the Ukrainian economy that are affiliated with high technological cooperation. First of all, I mean such companies as Lukoil, Sberbank, VTV, MTS, Evraz, etc. The court of Russian companies' investment activity in Ukraine may reach about $2 billion. The third direction of economic losses of Ukraine will become degrees in terms of volume and quality of cooperation with the Russian and other customs union countries in fuel and cargo transit through Ukraine as a result of sharp deterioration of political relations with Russia. Surely, first of all, it is a question of significant reduction of energy transit and cargo flow as a whole. Sharp deterioration of political relations of Russia with Ukraine in the beginning of 2014 had already led to revision of cooperation conditions between two countries in gas sphere, including substantial increase of the prices for the Russian gas and transition to an advance payment in calculations with Ukraine in its deliveries to customers. Reduction of Ukraine income in transport service in trade with Russia is estimated approximately in $4 million per year. The fourth direction, restriction in the area of manpower flow, labor migration, and correspondent reduction of money transfers. One more important direction of reduction of incomes in Ukraine. As a result of decreasing of the labor migration, by the way, Ukrainian budget receives in this sphere about $11 billion per year. That is equivalent of 7% of GDP of Ukraine. By the way, the whole budget of Ukraine is $175 billion in 2013. Meanwhile, this sum represented huge help for maintenance of living level of many Ukrainian families. The sum and the risk in the case of the further growth of tension in the Ukrainian-Russian relations is estimated about $7-8 billion. That is 4-5% of Ukrainian gross national product. In addition, it is necessary to note that the problem of labor migration are multidimensional and has huge societal and humanitarian importance and could not be reduced only to money transfer volume. Economic consequences of decreasing the intensity of mutual trips of Russian citizens to Ukraine and Ukrainian citizens to Russia is obvious, as it is obvious that Ukrainian side will suffer much more great from this factor action. So, taking into account a number of factors mentioned and some other reasons, the total size of possible losses of Ukraine in case of realization of the shock scenario of development of relations with Russia, between Russia and Ukraine, are estimated in approximately $30 billion in 2013, that practically twice exceeded the promise by IMF, a package of the help to Ukraine for example, for 2015. In horizon of the period 2015-2018, the total size of losses for Ukraine will reach about $100 billion. Thus, the real result of Ukrainian reorientation from Russia to EU will be no solution of its economical problems, but a disaster scenario. What is way out is possible. To my view, the optimistic scenario for Ukraine is possible, and it might be realized on the ways of closer cooperation with Russia. I would say the Ukrainian way to Europe lies through closer cooperation with Russia, since the high level of life that can be achieved in this framework supposes closer cooperation with Russia. And Russia already has demonstrated its willingness to provide Ukraine with real economic aid. In April 2010, Kyiv received a discount in $100 per 1,000 cubic meters of gas. In December 2013, Kyiv reached a 30% discount for gas and $15 billion of direct economic aid. Besides that, Moscow actively offered Kyiv various joint projects in aviation, machine building, shipbuilding, chemical, nuclear, space, electricity, and many other modern high-tech industries. Prospects of participation in Eurasian Union and the Customs Union open real possibilities for development of Ukrainian economy. However, around this cooperation, there is a plenty of myths has been created. Today, the most popular myth about the customs union is that it is political-based entity. The most radical approach is to interpret the customs union as follows. Whereas the European Union is based on human rights and freedoms, the customs union is based on Russia's expansion. However, the myth about the customs unions and Russia's expansion immediately fails as we compare administrative systems of these two unions. From the very beginning, the customs union has been created as a form of economic integration, but not a political one. The member states are free from any political obligation. The High Eurasian Economic Council and Eurasian Economic Commission are ruling bodies of the customs union. The presidency is transitory and passes from one member state to another in alphabetical order. All decisions are made by consensus, so each party has veto right to any decision of the Council, and none of the institutions possesses political authority. Nevertheless, we well know that the European Union has not only economic but also political dimension in contrast to the customs union. EU influences internal affairs, social policy, international external internal policy, external policies, social direction, energy, healthcare, and defense of the country. The further issue: what are the profits of the customs union for Ukraine? Integration between Ukraine and the customs union, which implies gas prices as in the customs union member states and free Ukrainian export into 160 million market, is really profitable for Ukrainians who lives in the country and pays for community services, since Ukraine customs union integration will lead potentially to 6-7% rise in Ukrainian economic growth in long term. The main condition for additional economic growth are strengthening of scientific cooperation in high added industries and on creating a system of mutual investing programs. At first sight, free trade zone should guarantee Ukrainian exporters of raw materials at least and agricultural products free access to European markets. On the contrary, in accordance to the agreement's provisions, Ukraine must reduce export of all agricultural products to EU. For example, wheat exports will be reduced by 3 times. Final products of Ukrainian machine building and chemical industry will face obstacles in the form of European technical standards. So, what is the reason of such free trade zone? Formally, the European market will be open for Ukraine, but this does not mean the real access, because sanitary norms, anti-dumping procedures, licenses, and technical standards, all their measures need a decade to be fully introduced in Ukraine. Ukrainian agricultural producers aren't ready to compete with their European counterparts in the sense of technology and investment. As a result, Ukrainian, even agricultural market will be filled with goods such as, for example, German yogurt, Dutch confectionery, and French cheese made of Ukrainian raw agricultural materials. There is no chance for Ukrainian food industry to compete with the EU1. Finally, the biggest portion of profit will be sold by European shareholders of big food companies. As to Ukraine, it will become natural resources based for European countries. These predictions are proved by statistics. Almost 90% of agricultural export to Europe is comprised by 4 groups of Ukrainian goods: crops, sunflower seeds, fats and butter and oil. Products of Ukrainian food industry are not always exported to the EU. The same is actual in relation to metallurgy and chemical industries. In Europe, only raw materials are in demand: scrap metal and bars, organic and non-organic compounds. Europe is not interested in Ukrainian products with high added value processing. It means Ukraine has low chance to develop its industry. To be fair, the EU applies such an approach not only towards Ukraine. This approach fixed secondary position of less developed countries of EU and makes it possible to increase advantages of more developed countries. As a result of EU enlargement, they get free access to new markets for selling their goods. They open new sources of cheap labor force and raw material. Meanwhile, the customs union is the biggest importer of Ukrainian industry commodities. For example, Russia consumes 30% of Ukrainian commodities. Entering the customs union could give Ukraine considerable economical benefits. $3 billion due to oil tax cancellation, about 500 million due to oil products tax cancellation, about 5 billion due to reduction of gas prices to Russian internal market price level. More than that, cancellation of Russia's protective measures will increase Ukrainian exports by approximately $700 million just in those several years. Probably the most important fact is the positive change in economic structure of Ukraine, that is, increase of high-tech industry. The analysis of prospects of joining Ukraine to customs union, alternatively to the European Union, demonstrates definite pluses for Ukraine. First, the concrete benefit from cancellation of customs duties on oil products and reductions of prices on gas. In total, on these measures, Ukraine will save about $9 billion. Secondly, introduction into the customs union at once will accelerate annual rates of increase of gross national products of Ukraine on several percent. Thirdly, entering the customs union will allow Ukraine to improve its balance of trade by $5.8 billion through reduction of prices of energy on energy resources and growth in exportation of homemade goods. In this context, it is important what goods we are talking about. Unlike the Europeans, Russian citizens, Belarusians and Kazakhs are ready to buy Ukrainian food with great pleasure. On territory of the customs union, for example, Ukrainian cheese, sausages, sweets, wine, vodka and so on are sold. Russia willingly buys finished Ukrainian products of the chemical industry, for example, plastic, paints, rubber, washing up liquids and so on. Ukrainian goods of mechanical engineering, such as cars, engine, tractors, cars and transformers, also are in great demand in Russia. In total, Russia imports more than 42% of all technological and 60% of finished goods from Ukraine. The future advantages are very attractive too. The countries of the customs union are interested in developing high-tech industries not only on their territories, but also on the territory of their neighbors. For a long time, industry of Ukraine, Russia, Belarus and Kazakhstan developed in a single economic complex. But with the disintegration of the USSR, industrial communication were mostly destroyed. For example, all helicopter assembling factories remain in the Russian Federation, and the largest supplier of engine for them on the territory of Ukraine. Similar situation takes place in aircraft construction, ferrous metallurgy and coke chemistry. Besides developing cooperation in grain industry of Ukraine, Kazakhstan and Russia could become the guarantors of world food security. They share in world export of barley constitutes 37%, wheat more than 20%, corn nearly 10%. In other words, Ukraine is interesting for the customs union as a raw material exporters, but as an equal partner. And maybe finishing. Last not least, a very sensitive aspect of relations between Ukraine and Russia is security sphere. Unfortunately, a number of influential actors of world politics consider Ukraine to be the base of military pressure upon Russia. Despite the promise of the early 1990s not to expand NATO to the east, the allies closely moved to the borders of Russian Federation that may potentially create a threat to Russia. So, and this aspect, we also have to bear in mind when we discuss the relations of the Russian Federation and Ukraine as nowadays and in the future. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gaman. It's time for us to start our Q&A. So please, come up to the mic and introduce yourself if you would.
Привет. I'm Dan Presser, and I'm Ukrainian, but I was born and raised in Texas. All four of my grandparents are from Ukraine. Fortunately, I was there in April a year ago. I knew nothing about what was going to happen. Went to try and find graves of my ancestors. The oldest grave I could find was 1938. Nothing before that existed anywhere. And I was told that there was an old Jewish cemetery, and we're talking about a place called Romney, and Konotop. Are you familiar with Ukraine?
Sure.
They're northeast of Kiev. And I went all around that area, and I was told, well, there's an old Jewish cemetery over here near the town square, so I went over there and couldn't find it. What happened was the Soviets had taken and just destroyed the old cemetery, and they made a soccer field out of it. So your lecture is about numbers and not about the heart. And the heart was missing in that lecture. So how would you put heart into what you said?
Thank you very much for your question and your attention. You see, I was rather limited in time, and so I applied mostly to economical reason, economical aspects, not stopping on the sensitive humanitarian aspects. But you are very right, it's very, very sensitive dimensions of the relations between Russians and Ukrainians, because a lot of families are, as a matter of fact, are separate families. One part of families live in Russia, another one in Ukraine. So, and for many millions of people, the question of good relations between two nations, it is the question of future destiny of their families. So it's very sensitive, it's very important aspects, and surely we should bear it in mind while we discuss the relations between two countries. Sure.
Good afternoon. I'm Colonel Pavluchik from Ukrainian Armed Forces. So I'm going to ask some tough questions probably because we already discussed some political aspects and economical aspects, but everything starts with security. Every people in the world, they are concerned about security. And you know, after annexation, illegal annexation of Crimea, And after what's going on in eastern part of Ukraine, we are not ready to talk with Russians concerning any other issues than security issues. We are losing people every day. Russians and active duty Russians are losing people every day. How you can comment on this kind of situation when we don't apply our diplomacy to the military issues? We can't reach an agreement. We are happy to start a lot of projects with Russians, and I spent 15 years in Russians. I went to the first grade in Moscow. I spent 7 years in the far east of Russia, and now I'm standing here in the United States and understand that to reach the common agreement we need to cooperate on all levels, not just economical or other. Just could you comment on this?
Okay. Thank you very much for your question. First of all, any war finished by negotiation, any war. But applying to the first part of your question, as you mentioned about the annexation of Crimea, maybe you know that Crimea arranged special universal referendum on the destiny of Crimea, and this referendum was legal and legitimate because it was declared by the higher organ of power, People's Parliament of Crimea. So, and more than 90% of the citizens in Crimea took part in this referendum, and more than 90% supported the idea of returning to Russia. And in such a way, you see, surely in the same situation, the contradiction between the right to self-determination and the principle of territorial integrity exists. It's a real problem, it's a real contradiction. But while assessing the pluses and minuses of the process, we should bear in mind and take into account the concrete context of the concrete event. And in this case, in Crimea case, we should bear in mind that in that moment, I mean February and March of the current year, there was no legal authority in Kiev, because on February 22, we know that reached
It's not true. We had our parliament. We had our parliament, and the Speaker of Parliament he took power according to our legislation. So we had power. It's not like that. It's not. It wasn't like completely untrue that what you call, but it was the legal system which took control of the whole what's going on in Ukraine. And may I comment also on Crimea elections? My wife and I, we came here last June. She's from Crimea, and actually I had all of her possessions in Crimea. And she voted while she was here. She voted. Her uncle told her that he saw that she voted while she was here. It's illegal. How she could vote when she was staying here and studying and
you see, I'm not
was
a member of the Electoral Commission in Crimea, so you should address your question to the Electoral Commission in Crimea, not for me.
Yes, I understand, but you use, you use propaganda information. Which
you see, I use information I saw my own eyes because I visited Crimea. I saw the people who were happy to return to Russia. You see?
Yeah, 30% to be exact.
No. You see, it's discussed because you appeal to the very, formal figures. Why 30, not 130, for example? Or
yeah, but it was like that, more than 100 in Sevastopol. More than 100. It was official information provided by Russian news.
You see, it's a tale. It is not about real politics.
It
is
just
discussion. So, if you just ask questions and then you may comment.
And I would like to comment your statement considering the mass of people who died in east of Ukraine. It is true, but you should confirm that people who live in the cities of Donetsk and Lugansk died from the bombing of Ukrainian army, because it is not possible to bomb themselves. You see, it is not possible to bomb from heavy artillery standing on the same
It
place.
was Russian artillery.
It's
It
very.
was confirmed.
You see, it is tail, another tail.
No, it was confirmed by,
No.
by the United States as well.
You see, please show me at least one example where Russian soldiers were sized. Just one
Check
example.
internet.
No one soldier, no one officer of Russian army were not submitted to the public. It is still about Russian participation in Eastern conflict. No one soldiers,
In
no one
In
officer.
June 10, active duty paratroopers were shown on our TV
No,
in Russia.
it
Not in
was-
Russia, of course, it's
It
propaganda.
was argued that there were not soldiers of the army. It was argued. It was shown.
And your president also told us that there are no forces
Yes,
in Crimea.
there were no
And
the
after that, he
soldiers
admitted it.
who waged
This
military.
is not,
action.
we're not going to
Okay,
get anywhere here. Again, this is a wonderful example, for, the audience to see how it's so difficult to establish the dialogue. And the breakthrough is absolutely necessary, and that's where it requires tremendous leadership and support, of course, the United States and the European Union. We're not going to continue this back and forth at the moment, because I know that there are other questions.
I appreciate that.
Thank you for your presentation, Dr. Oxana. I'm going to try to stay away from the emotional topics, although the economics of Ukrainian confectionery can be very emotional to some people. My question is, again, related to free trade and economic restructuring. Some people would argue that, yes, Ukraine, there would be a period of economic restructuring in Ukraine if they do sign a free trade agreement with the European Union. As experienced in Moldova and Georgia, for Moldovan, Georgian wines and Armenian cognac, for example, to be more palatable or up to standards to the European Union, they have to increase quality. Simple capitalism, simple economics. There would be a few companies that would go out of business, but a great deal of Ukrainian companies would have to increase their quality to be more competitive in the European market. The European Union has signed multiple free trade agreements with countries across Latin America. Except Venezuela, almost every country in Latin America now either has a free trade agreement or is currently negotiating a free trade agreement. Could you comment on this, because it seems that the European market is much larger than the customs union market? I think of, yes, France, UK are having economic troubles, but Russia, Belarus, and Kazakhstan, and possibly Armenia now, don't seem as big of a market for Ukrainian products compared to Latin America and the entirety of Europe. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Surely the customs union market is less than European Union, because the customs union, it is approximately 200 million people, while the European Union is about 450. But you are very right when you say that European markets are not ready to accept the products of Ukrainian industry, because Ukrainian wine, Ukrainian cheese, Ukrainian confectionery, Ukrainian aircrafts are not competitive with the production of European factories. It's very funny to wait that, for example, the citizens of Belgium or Switzerland will stop consume their own chocolate and passes to consumer the production of Petro Poroshenko Russian company. And the same concerns any other goods. Meanwhile, the citizens of Kazakhstan, Belarus, Russia are ready to accept and to consume the production of Ukraine factories. So, and the final situation, the final choice, it's better to have a lesser market, at least 2 million of people, who are ready to consume your production, than to have 400 of million of people who are not ready to eat your food. That is the choice, real choice.
Thank you for your lecture. Now I know much more information about Ukraine, and I have 2 questions. The first one is about gas discount. You said that Ukraine had some gas discount, and I have a question. taking into consideration that the average price for gas for Europe is cheaper than the price for Ukraine. Where is this discount? And the second question about Ukrainian propaganda. You said that there were more than 23 years of Ukrainian propaganda against Russia. Could you give some examples of this propaganda and say something about the results of this propaganda?
Thank you very much for your questions. As to the first question, you see, in January of 2009, former Prime Minister of Ukraine, Yulia Tymoshenko, signed from Ukrainian side an agreement with Gazprom of Russia, an agreement in accordance with which the price for Ukraine, for gas for Ukraine was settled as $4,050 per thousand. So, in 2010, Ukraine got discount for $100. Then, where new agreement signed. So, at the moment, the total debt of Ukraine that did not pay for consumed gas is about $3.5 billion. It depends on the system of the calculation. So, according to the latest agreement, Ukraine got discount that allows Ukraine, first of all, to pay the debt step by step, and secondly, to have the price not 4,080 or 4,050, but 450, but 350 or 370. That is discount. As to your second question, you see, I visit Ukraine rather often, and during this whole period of 23 years, I have had a lot of things very surprising to those who know real Ukrainian history and real life of Ukrainian society. Yesterday I quote one of just examples. I may quote it again. For example, one of the prominent poets in Ukraine surely is Taras Shevchenko. But Ukrainians now tell that Shevchenko wrote his poetry not only in Ukrainian, but also in Russian. That Shevchenko had his own very private diary that was written in Russia. And nobody of Ukrainians mentioned that Shevchenko was liberated due to Russian painters who paid for liberation of Shevchenko. And by the way, quite often it is quoted the poetry of Shevchenko, who wrote, yeah, I get that you're Ukrainian, you can understand. So, кохайтеся чорнобриві та з москалями, бо москалі люди чужі і зроблять лихо з вами. І ви должны знать, что москали в данном контексте, that is term Moskal means not the Russian by origin, but soldiers. So, in such examples, maybe, I mean, thousands.
Yeah, I understand, but you know, when I said about gas prices, I mean just final gas prices for square meter. And the gas for Ukraine is really more expensive than the gas for almost all European countries. And this situation is from 2002 or 2004. And according to my second question, your example about Shevchenko and about Russian painters is a part of school program.
Sure. But this is a great secret for Ukrainian society.
Really, I don't think so, because when I was in the school, we studied this part of his life. And we know that Zhukovsky, the greatest Russian painter, that he helped.
He was poet, by the way.
Yeah.
Zhukovsky was poet. Brylov was painter, by the way.
Okay,
To inform you.
Now we just speak about Shevchenko. We know that these people helped him to I live in Ukraine, and I have never seen something like Ukrainian propaganda which can give such terrible results. By the way, yeah, I speak Russian.
I also speak Ukrainian, by the way, it's very
Yeah, I
serious.
know.
So, you see, thank you very much for excellent illustration to my thesis, because you are a typical victim of propaganda, because you do not know such all-famous fact that Shevchenko was liberated by Russian poet and Russian painter. And secondly, as to your question concerning the price for Ukrainian gas, it's very, very surprisingly for me that you ask me about that. Why do you ask about this? Your former Prime Minister, Yulia Tymoshenko, who signed the agreement. It's very, very funny. Your Prime Minister signed an agreement concerning... Let me answer your question. So, it's very strange. Your Prime Minister, Yulia Tymoshenko, signed the agreement on gas prices for Ukraine in January 2008. But why do you ask her? Why do you sign so agreement? Why do you ask me about that? I'm not Yulia Tymoshenko, I'm Oxana Gaman.
Okay, I think that I need to answer to this question. You know, I asked you about gas prices because you mentioned it in your lecture, and you mentioned it something like more than twice, yeah? And I have told 2 minutes ago that we have terrible gas price, not maybe from the beginning of Tymoshenko becoming prime minister. We have such prices maybe since 2000 or 2002.
You don't know, because before signing this agreement, the gas price was about $200, quite very low price, and before this, the price was even lower, much lower.
No, the gas prices is open statistic and everyone can see them in internet.
You see, it's better for you to ask me, why don't you give Ukraine gas without any money? Why?
I think that's,
There's some economic law, you know.
security,
Thank you.
we can have dispute on gas. Any other questions?
Thank you for the presentation. I have 2 questions regarding the customs union. The first question, I've heard the opinion several times that the customs union would not be successful without Ukraine. I'm curious what your opinion of that is. And then my follow-up question is, when you were speaking about the customs union versus the European Union, it was always a either or an or option. Could you give your opinion about some sort of option that would incorporate both sides, rather than Ukraine being some sort of buffer between the European Union and Russia? Why couldn't it be a connection between the European Union and Russia?
Excellent question. Thank you very much for this. Let me begin from the second question. You see, really, the most serious mistake of those who discuss the advantages and shortcomings of the 2 models of integration for Ukraine is categorical question. You should be only with one union. For example, José Manuel Barroso said that Ukraine cannot enjoy integration with 2 unions simultaneously. It seems to me it is absolutely possible. And Russian leadership several times proposed the unification of economic ties between 2 unions, European unions and Eurasian unions. And this is very old idea to create Europe from Lisbon till Vladivostok. So, and Ukraine, by the way, may be the bridge between 2 unions, and such union may create incredible perspective of economic prosperity for Ukraine, Russia, old Europe, and all the continent. That is the main, the main successful idea to unite the economical potential and cooperation of these 2 integration blocks. As to your first question concerning where the customs union be successful without Ukraine, I can tell, surely with participation of Ukraine, customs union will be much more successful, surely. But it does not mean that without Ukraine, customs union is impossible. It is possible, it is workable, and it is economically effective. But joining Ukraine to customs union will open the opportunities for overcoming economical difficulties for Ukraine and for further development for all the countries that are united in the customs union.
Thank you for your presentation. My name is Spencer Myers. I'm really enjoying this event. My credentials are only that I have a Russian daughter and I have an intense interest. Professor Vasilieva knows this quote from Henry Kissinger. Things are seldom what they seem, and they are hardly ever black or white. So I think we're seeing that here. Just a couple of questions and thoughts came to my mind. Number one, I think the world would be more comfortable with the election in Ukraine if there had been international election inspectors allowed in to really monitor it. And number two, do you think there's a chance in Moscow or St. Petersburg that we could be having an American lecturer come and share views, or is it unlikely with the restriction of the free press? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will begin with the second question. Surely our university, Gaman University, we are aware, our Russian Political Science Association, many other Russian universities and NGO usually invite a lot of Western scientists, a lot of Western lecturers to deliver their position, the views of different people concerning some sensitive issues of international and domestic policy. For example, from time to time, once every year, we arrange, for example, big Russian political science congress. And usually this congress are attended by hundreds of political scientists from all over the world. So, and we with pleasure submit opportunity to impress different views, and it seems to us that the only way to find way out from the difficult situation is conversation. We should to speak each other. So we have floor for any point of view. And
Yeah, the issue of the monitors of the election.
You mean the international context of the crisis?
I mean, bearing in mind that there was an election without any real international monitoring.
International monitor fund, you mean? You see, at the moment, the greatest problem for ensuring international observation in the east of Ukraine is that Ukrainian army limited this opportunity. For example, due to the bombing of Ukrainian army, the representatives of the International Organization for Security and Cooperation didn't manage even see the place of the ruined Boeing, damaged Boeing. So, and that is a problem because Russia insisted many times for invitation international observers to the military, the square of military conflicts, but the opportunity of international observation is limited due to the position to the position of Ukrainian side, unfortunately.
As you can see, sir, there is a lot of heart. So I thank Professor Gaman for giving us the numbers during the first part of the presentation. because if it were hard 100%, we would be burned alive from the flames and passions. But what it demonstrates to people who are not as actively involved and who have not been born in Russia or Ukraine is how difficult the situation is, how tremendously difficult. And again, I will finish with what I've started. If we only limit our attempts to understand the situation by applying or by going to the one source of information, we will never be able to start, conduct, and maintain a dialogue. There always will be this war is not going to go forever. There will have to be a compromise. And in order for the compromise to be achieved, as we have seen here, we will have to find some common ground. And so that was what the lecture was about. And the numbers are, we here in America love emotions and love this beautiful drive to make things better. And the emotion of a conflict is something that's very easy for us to talk about. It's very easy to get involved in. It's very easy to understand. Numbers are hard to understand. But when a country like Ukraine and like Russia is going through such a tremendous, tremendous transformation, it's important to know numbers. Because numbers is what will heat people's houses, what will give, what kind of food will be in school lunches, what kind of scholarships students will get, what kind of faith and destiny of small businesses there will be. So, it will have to be in the combination of these two factors. But again, it was a great example of how charged the situation is. And very sad because, indeed, those who know, they know how close Russians and Ukrainians are. It's the same blood that's running in these people. And, what we call propaganda, what we call politics, high politics can pull these people apart, or it can bring people closer together. And the choice is us, and the choice is people we elect, and the choice is the positions that we take in our lives. Thank you very much for listening.